Steve Jobs never saw unhappiness as a curse. To him, it was a signal, a flashing red light telling him something had to change. When he dropped out of college, it wasn't because he didn't care. It was because every day he sat in a classroom, he felt a deep unhappiness eating away at him. That unhappiness was a signal that he wasn't where he was supposed to be. For most people, unhappiness makes them quit. For Jobs, it made him search, and searching led to Apple. People spend their entire lives running away from unhappiness. They see it as an enemy, something to hide, something to numb with distractions, entertainment, or quick fixes. But Steve Jobs saw it differently. To him, unhappiness wasn't a curse. It was a signal, a compass pointing directly to what was broken, what was missing, what needed to change. When Jobs was young, he walked into college full of hope, but within months the joy disappeared. He felt empty, uninspired, and trapped in a system that demanded money from his parents without giving him meaning in return. Every lecture he sat through, every requirement forced upon him, carried a weight of dissatisfaction. And it was in that unhappiness that Jobs found his first turning point. Instead of silencing the voice inside him, he listened. That voice told him, "This isn't your path." Dropping out wasn't an act of failure. It was an act of courage, a decision guided by the signal of unhappiness. Most people mistake unhappiness for weakness. They believe that if you feel unhappy, you're broken. But Jobs proved the opposite. Unhappiness is data. It's feedback. It's life telling you that the story you're living is not the one you were meant for. When he left college, he didn't stop learning. He started learning what mattered to him. Calligraphy, design, typography. These subjects weren't on the traditional path of success, but they spoke to him. And decades later, that single calligraphy course shaped the elegance of the Macintosh. Think about that for a second. The very dissatisfaction of sitting in classrooms he didn't love became the seed that gave the world fonts, beauty, and design and technology. Unhappiness is not a curse. It is a clue. And every great creator, innovator, or leader understands this truth. The difference between people who live ordinary lives and those who change the world is how they respond to unhappiness. Some drown in it. Some escape it, but the few, the rare few, turn it into a question. What is this unhappiness trying to tell me? Steve Jobs didn't romanticize pain. He didn't go searching for unhappiness. But when it arrived, he treated it as a teacher. Every sleepless night, every moment of frustration, every gnawing feeling of this isn't right, was not ignored. It was examined. And in those examinations, he found direction. Imagine if he had silenced that feeling in college, forced himself through years of study he hated, and lived a safe, predictable life. There would be no Apple, no iPhone, no revolution. Unhappiness was not the end of his story. It was the beginning. And this is the part most people don't understand. Happiness doesn't always show you where to go. Happiness can make you complacent. It can trick you into thinking you've arrived, when really, you've just stopped moving. But unhappiness, it's raw, it's uncomfortable, and it demands action. Jobs recognized that the very moments he felt the most unhappy were the moments he was closest to the truth. They stripped away illusions, forced him to confront reality, and demanded that he make a choice to stay stuck or to move forward. When he left Reed College, he didn't have a map, he didn't have certainty, but he had a signal. That restless dissatisfaction pushed him to explore, to experiment, to connect with ideas most people ignored. Unhappiness didn't paralyze him, it propelled him. And here's the paradox. Most people run from unhappiness because they think it will ruin their lives. But the irony is, running from it ruins them far more than facing it ever could. They stay in jobs they hate. They remain in relationships that drain them. They live in cities that suffocate them. all because they believe unhappiness means they're failing. Jobs saw the opposite. Unhappiness means something needs to change. It means the life you're living is misaligned with the life you're meant for. Every time Jobs encountered unhappiness, he treated it as a doorway. When he was restless at school, the doorway was dropping out. When he felt constrained in the companies he worked for, the doorway was starting at Apple, and later. When he was thrown out of the very company he built, that unhappiness became the doorway to NXT and Pixar, two ventures that reshaped his destiny. Unhappiness is not your enemy. It is your greatest messenger. And if you can learn to read its signal the way Jobs did, you'll discover that the very thing you fear the most, the dissatisfaction, the discontent, the emptiness, isn't there to punish you. It's there to redirect you, to shake you awake, to remind you that the life you want is still waiting. But you must first have the courage to listen to the signal. Pain is the kind of teacher nobody wants, yet it is the one that forges greatness. For Steve Jobs, pain was not an interruption to his journey. It was the very force that pushed his vision forward. Every milestone in his life was born not in comfort, but in the sharp sting of loss, rejection, and heartbreak. He didn't avoid pain. He allowed it to burn away illusions and force him to see what truly mattered. Think about the moment he was fired from Apple, the company he had built in his parents' garage. The dream he had poured his life into was suddenly ripped from his hands. For Jobs, it was devastating. He said himself that he felt abandoned, humiliated, and stripped of everything that gave his life meaning. For most people, that kind of blow would end the story. They would retreat, settle for smaller ambitions, and tell themselves it was better not to try again. But Jobs was not like most people. That pain became fuel. The very act of losing Apple forced him to confront the question, what now? And in answering that, he discovered something far more powerful than success. He discovered clarity. Pain has a way of stripping life down to its essentials. It takes away the noise, the distractions, the illusions of security. When Jobs was fired, the pain forced him to see that his identity wasn't tied to a company or a title. It was tied to the work itself, to the act of creation. That realization was what led him to start NXT, a company ahead of its time. It was what pushed him to purchase a small graphics division from Lucasfilm, a risky decision that transformed into Pixar, the studio that redefined animation forever. The very pain that could have broken him instead redirected him toward two of the most revolutionary ventures of his life. That is the paradox of pain. It feels like destruction, but in truth, it is transformation. Pain doesn't take from us. It strips away what no longer belongs, forcing us to look at ourselves more honestly than we ever have before. Jobs didn't just survive pain. He used it. He let it sharpen his vision, make him ruthless about what mattered, and uncompromising about the work he wanted to bring into the world. When he returned to Apple years later, he was not the same man who had been fired. Pain had reshaped him. He no longer needed validation. He no longer chased approval. He was focused entirely on vision, and that vision led to the creation of products that would define the future. The iPod, the iPhone, the iPad. Each of these was born from a man who had endured the agony of failure, betrayal, and disappointment, and had chosen to let those scars refine him rather than destroy him. Jobs often said that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that ever happened to him. At first glance, that sounds insane. How could losing everything be the best thing? But when you look deeper, you realize he was right. Without that pain, he would have remained stuck in the same patterns, surrounded by the same people, limited by the same narrow perspective. Pain freed him. It forced him to rebuild from nothing, and in rebuilding, he discovered new parts of himself he never would have uncovered otherwise. And isn't that the truth about all of us? Pain pushes us to places we would never go willingly. No one chooses heartbreak. No one chooses failure. No one chooses rejection. Yet when it arrives, it has the power to redirect our lives in ways comfort never could. Jobs understood this better than anyone. His darkest moments were not detours from success. They were the very engine of it. Look at Pixar. At the time he bought it, Jobs didn't know it would succeed. It bled money. It looked like a reckless gamble, but it was pain that drove him to keep it alive. Pain that said, "I will not be defined by what I lost. I will create something new." And Pixar went on to become the studio that gave us Toy Story, Finding Nemo, and an entire world of storytelling magic. That was not luck. That was pain transformed into vision. The same story repeats itself in countless ways throughout his life. Illness, betrayal, setbacks. Every time pain entered, Jobs grew sharper, more focused, more relentless. He never wasted pain by drowning in it. He never allowed it to become an excuse for quitting. Instead, he asked the question, "What is this pain here to teach me?" And the answers changed the world. Pain is the most brutal mirror you will ever face. It will strip away your pride, your illusions, your comforts, until all that's left is you and the truth you've been avoiding. That's what Jobs experienced when he stood outside of Apple, stripped of everything he thought he needed. And it was in that raw emptiness that his vision expanded beyond anything he could have imagined before. Pain doesn't just test you, it pushes you. It forces you to see what you're made of, to discover the depths of your resilience, to uncover the strength you never thought you had. For Steve Jobs, pain was never the end of the story. It was the fire that refined him, the storm that cleared the path, the pressure that turned vision into reality. Comfort is the enemy of progress. Comfort whispers that what you have is enough, that you don't need to change, that good enough is good enough. But Steve Jobs never accepted comfort. He believed that discomfort, the irritation, the dissatisfaction, the restless unhappiness with the way things are, is what drives true innovation. It wasn't joy that pushed him to revolutionize industries. It was the relentless discomfort with mediocrity. Look at the early days of personal computers. To most people, a beige box sitting on a desk was good enough. It processed numbers, it typed documents, it got the job done. But to Jobs, that was unbearable. He looked at those lifeless machines and felt a gnawing discomfort. Why should technology be ugly? Why should it be cold, soulless, and intimidating? That discomfort gave birth to the Macintosh, a computer that wasn't just functional, but beautiful, approachable, and even playful. Jobs' refusal to accept the comfortable standard pushed the entire industry forward. And it didn't stop there. Years later, when Apple was back under his leadership, he looked at the music industry. People were comfortable with CDs. They were comfortable with bulky players and chaotic libraries of tracks scattered everywhere. But Jobs was not. He felt the frustration of carrying a bag of CDs just to enjoy music. That discomfort ignited the iPod, 1,000 songs in your pocket. Simple, elegant, liberating. It wasn't born from comfort. It was born from the irritation of knowing things could be better. Then came the phone. At the time, phones were a mess. Tiny buttons, clunky designs, menace buried under menace. The world accepted them because that's just the way things were. Jobs could not. He felt the pain of every awkward click, every wasted second, every design that insulted the human experience. And so he pushed for something no one else dared to imagine. A phone that wasn't just a phone, but a gateway to the future. That discomfort gave us the iPhone, a device that didn't just change technology, but changed the way humans live, work, and connect. The pattern is undeniable. Every breakthrough Jobs gave to the world began with dissatisfaction. It began with discomfort so sharp, so irritating, that he couldn't sleep until he solved it. Comfort would have left him with the ordinary. Discomfort demanded that he reach for the extraordinary. And here's the truth that most people don't want to hear. If you're comfortable, you will never innovate. Comfort makes you stagnant. It tricks you into thinking you've reached the peak, when really, you're stuck on a small hill. Discomfort forces you to climb higher. It creates the hunger, the urgency, the drive to look at something the world accepts and say, "This isn't enough. We can do better." Jobs was a master of harnessing discomfort. He would walk into meetings and dismantle the work of his own teams, not out of cruelty, but because he was uncomfortable with compromise. He refused to let products ship if they didn't meet a standard that others thought was impossible. That discomfort made him demanding, but it also made Apple legendary. Every pixel mattered. Every curve of glass mattered. Every second saved in user experience mattered. It wasn't an obsession with perfection. It was intolerance for mediocrity. And discomfort doesn't just push innovation in technology. It pushes innovation in life. Jobs constantly reinvented himself because he was never satisfied with staying the same. He was restless, always searching, always uncomfortable with limits. That restless energy is what made him evolve from a dropout to a visionary entrepreneur, to a man who shaped culture itself. Think about this: what if Jobs had been comfortable in college? What if he had stayed in his dorm room, accepted the lectures, and followed the script laid out for him? There would be no Apple. What if he had been comfortable after being fired from Apple the first time? What if he had accepted defeat, settled into a smaller role, or retreated into comfort? There would be no Pixar, no iPhone, no revolution. Every great leap forward in his life came from moments when he was profoundly uncomfortable. And this is the hidden power of discomfort. It makes you restless, it makes you curious, it makes you bold. It forces you to confront the question, what could be better than this? That question is the seed of every innovation. Jobs never accepted the world as it was. He imagined the world as it could be, and the gap between those two, the discomfort of reality versus the vision of possibility, was where innovation was born. Discomfort is not pleasant. It's not easy. It keeps you awake at night. It gnaws at you. It refuses to let you settle. But if you learn to harness it, it becomes the engine of creation. Jobs didn't fight discomfort. He leaned into it. He allowed it to shape his decisions, to guide his standards, to fuel his hunger. And that is why the world remembers him as an innovator, not just an entrepreneur. Because while others chased comfort, he chased the unease of knowing things could be better. Unhappiness is raw energy. For most people, it becomes poison. They complain, they dwell, they let it eat them alive. But Steve Jobs learned how to take that same energy and transform it into power. He didn't deny unhappiness. He didn't run from it. He turned it into fuel, into fire, into the relentless force that made him unstoppable. When Jobs faced rejection, when doors slammed in his face, when investors turned him down, he didn't collapse. He took the sting of that unhappiness and used it as a spark. Every no became a challenge. Every failure became a reason to rise higher. That's the difference between people who break under the weight of unhappiness and people who bend it to their will. Jobs refused to be broken. He converted the pain into momentum. Think about the time he was ousted from Apple. For most founders, that would be the end. To build something from nothing, to see it grow into a global company, only to be thrown out. There's no deeper unhappiness for a creator. But instead of drowning in bitterness, Jobs redirected that energy. He built NXT, not out of comfort, but out of defiance. He pushed forward with Pixar, not because it was easy, but because unhappiness demanded he channel it somewhere. He transformed what could have been despair into one of the greatest comebacks in business history. This transformation is what separates visionaries from everyone else. Where others see unhappiness as a signal to stop, visionaries see it as a source of strength. Jobs knew that energy cannot be destroyed, only redirected. The same energy that makes a person miserable can make them unstoppable if they choose to convert it. He chose to build instead of break, to create instead of complain, to transform his unhappiness into power. And it wasn't just in the big moments. Even in the smallest details, Jobs turned dissatisfaction into innovation. If he held a prototype in his hand and felt unhappy with its design, that unhappiness didn't frustrate him into quitting. It fueled him to push his team harder, to demand the impossible, to refine again and again until the product lived up to the vision in his mind. Every frustration became a spark. Every flaw became a reason to innovate. That's why Apple products carry something deeper than technology. They carried obsession. They carried the fingerprints of a man who refused to let unhappiness weaken him. Instead, he allowed it to drive him beyond the boundaries of normal effort. This is why he once said that the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. Because behind that so-called craziness is a fire born from unhappiness with the way things are. Unhappiness was the silent force behind Jobs' boldest decisions. When he looked at the world and saw products that lacked beauty, he felt unhappy. When he saw companies that settled for mediocrity, he felt unhappy. When he saw lives being lived without imagination or daring, he felt unhappy. And instead of letting that unhappiness turn into despair, he turned it into design, into vision, into revolution. The power of this mindset is staggering. Imagine if you could take every ounce of unhappiness in your own life and redirect it. Instead of seeing it as a curse, you see it as fuel. Instead of letting it stop you, you let it charge you. That's what Jobs mastered. That's why, in his darkest hours, he didn't collapse into bitterness. He created it. He built from it. He allowed the very thing that should have destroyed him to give him the power to reshape the future. Unhappiness is a choice point. It can become a prison, or it can become power. Most people choose prison. They allow their unhappiness to lock them into patterns of fear, excuses, and wasted time. Jobs chose differently. He broke the bars, he channeled the energy, and he turned it into the drive that made Apple the most valuable company in the world. And maybe that's the deepest lesson of all. Success doesn't come from avoiding unhappiness. It comes from transforming it. It comes from taking that restless energy and bending it into something that builds, something that lasts, something that matters. Jobs knew that unhappiness wasn't there to destroy him. It was there to fuel him. And he used that fuel to light a fire that still burns today. At the heart of Steve Jobs' journey is a truth most people spend their lives avoiding. Unhappiness is not your enemy. It is your greatest teacher. Every time Jobs felt dissatisfied, every time he was broken by failure, every time life cornered him with pain, he turned those moments into stepping stones toward greatness. Unhappiness was his signal. It told him when it was time to change. Pain was his engine. It pushed his vision forward when nothing else could. Discomfort was his compass. It forced him to see beyond mediocrity and create what no one else dared to imagine. And above all, he transformed every ounce of unhappiness into power. Fuel for relentless pursuit, fuel for obsession, fuel for innovation that redefined the world. This is why Steve Jobs' darkest lessons are also his most powerful. Not because he avoided unhappiness, but because he embraced it, listened to it, and redirected it. The very things that should have stopped him became the very things that propelled him. And that is the message for all of us. Stop fearing unhappiness. Stop treating it as a curse. Learn to use it. Learn to hear what it's trying to tell you. Because if you do, the same way Jobs did, you'll discover that unhappiness is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of everything extraordinary